Just a quick introduction. Apart from what Ghana said, I was teaching in the past, and for the last couple of years, I've gone into full-time training and consulting work. We do quite a bit of stuff in the area of Agile. That's I would say, 90% of the company's income comes from training, consulting, and coaching of Agile-related work. So this is our huge space that we are in. Now, like Ghana mentioned, I had the pleasure of, in fact, working with many companies, many multinational companies as well. And I've done some work with Deloitte. That's quite true. They came for my certification program. My biggest client that you will see here in this slide is Philip Morris. I've done work for them for more than a year now. We're still doing work for them in the form of training, coaching, and consulting. And what I want to share is that, the very word Agile really means it's never a one-size-fits-all, right? And while there is some guidance, it will have to be tailored for the interests of the organization. Now, I wanted this session to be interactive, so I'll probably start with a question, if you don't mind. I would be happy if you can use your handphone to answer this question. Just a quick question. All of us on this call can answer. So I would like you to use a handphone and get to this link, menti.com, and just put on this code that you see there. You can just go to your Google Chrome and you can just click menti.com. And when you ask for the code, you can key in that code 78933535. And what I would like you to do is to share your thoughts on what are the challenges you face. You could select more than one or even all, it's fine. Okay, we've got our first response coming in. Okay, 3 people responded. Nice. I suppose that's all, right? Oh, Tenny is in the call. Tenny, welcome in.
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Sennett. I was in a meeting just now.
Yeah. All right. So I think there's 4 of us, and absolutely everyone has answered. The challenge that we're facing now is things are getting very complex, right? And in that, what I mean is that just too many aspects to consider, too many different requirements coming in. And the worst of it, it's very volatile, right? I mean, it's just changing. It's not even stable. And that's presenting even more challenges. And, sometimes it's unclear, it's ambiguous, and sometimes it's very uncertain. You cannot see the light at the end of the tunnel. So if you cannot see what is going to happen, then how are you going to structure your work according to that outcome? Now, I'm sure for those of us in this call, all of us like Om, P, Isari, On, sorry, if you'd like to call me by that name. Projects that we were in back then, right? 10 over years, 20 years ago, were not that much difficult like what we're seeing now, right? Because the rate of change, the expectation, the stakeholder, the environment, the technology has changed so much and so rapidly that we are today in a VUCA environment, right? What you just filled up earlier on, it's just VUCA, VUCA, right? VUCA. And like it or not, it's going to get even more complex. It's going to get, the timelines are going to get shorter and things are going to get ambiguous. So what I'm saying here is, if we do what we've always done, then we will get what we've always got. In other words, what I'm saying is, if we're going to be bombarded with all this complexity. And if we keep doing things the way that we've always done, surely we will not be able to see the difference and make the change and respond to the market, right? Because we don't want to react, we want to respond, right? That's the difference between react and respond. So that is where I want to set the things in that tone. And Agile is really very relevant and suited for the VUCA environment. That is why it's even born to address the VUCA environment. So I'm just going to run through very quickly for all of us in this call. Maybe I can just ask a quick question. How many here has heard and or probably been exposed to some training in Agile? Anyone? If you can just maybe put a thumbs up, then we know. Okay, Kenny, yes. Other than Kenny, none of you have been exposed. What about Om and B? Yes. Oh yeah, I can see your thumbs up now. Okay, just come up. Sorry. I'm not sure about Om. Okay, so I'm assuming B, if you can just unmute yourself and if you can just share with me what was the kind of project that you were involved in the past using Agile?
Actually, I wasn't sure like my project was Agile or not. So we do separate it into like roll out, we call like a rollout. So it's kind of like a phases. And by each of the rollout, we separate it into smaller function. And in the smaller function, we separate it into each of the user story, I would say. So in each of the user story, then we list out the requirement, and then we develop each of the user story, and then just reporting to our SA to see the little progress and to do the unit test little by little. Yeah, so that was my experience in the project.
Okay, that's nice. Thank you for sharing that. And how was that experience that you've had? Was it good? Was it effective?
Yeah, it's good. It's kind of like seeing the milestone to see the progress step by step, and then I think it's kind of like reducing the risk of delay as well. So like if you plan the longer time and you do the bigger function itself, then you cannot test and then submit into to the SA, and so it will be at risk if you have some problems or issues for delay.
Okay, very good.
And you can report like promptly.
Okay, thank you for setting that context. Then B will make you the Agile champion for Deloitte Islands, and then you can help coach everyone. No, that's the whole idea, right? When I go to companies, I always try to figure out who can continue this journey, and usually we do that process, so this good work can continue. But anyway, for those of us who are not aware of Agile, and I just want to quickly summarize, in essence, what we're saying is what exactly B has mentioned, right? We're actually breaking a large parts into smaller chunks, and we do it iteratively and incrementally. Okay, these are big words, I know. Let me repeat myself. We're breaking up a large chunk of work into smaller parts, right? And we do it iteratively and incrementally. And by doing so, what we achieve is we see tangible outcomes more frequently, right? As opposed to waiting for something, say about 3 to 4 weeks down the road, you see an outcome as early as 2 weeks. And that's great, right? If you can see outcomes early, number one, what happens is your stakeholders get to understand if that's what they want, number one. Number two, the developers, in this case, if Ghana is the contracted person doing work for you, Gunnar can then get that feedback from you, and he knows, and his team will know that they are doing what they're supposed to be doing, right? So by having this iterative, incremental, modularized approach, what happens is ultimately we are seeing progress every so often, number one. And number two, we are aligned. So that is why Agile projects, if you notice in this graph, has always shown higher success rates. And the most recent reports, the rates are actually much higher. And this is not very surprising, right? If you can sort of see the big picture. Now, please understand one thing. I'm not here to tell you that Agile is the best for everything. Now, there are some industries where Agile don't quite work. For example, in medical, defense, aviation, aeronautics, and many, many industries. But I would say 90% of businesses out there are already using Agile in some form or the other. So when I say some form of the other, you know, we have this pure Agile on the extreme right, as opposed to the traditional, but we also have the hybrid. And just for information, yesterday I was having a session with the largest organization in Malaysia, actually. We had a one-day awareness session. This is only for the directors. And their public works department, you know, and they cannot be pure Agile because they, you know, in construction, you need to be sequential sometimes. But they realize that, you know, they need to be hybrid because there are certain areas or functions that they need to be Agile too, which they are not. So they're looking at a more hybrid approach, right? So, but in the case of what you're doing in Deloitte, from what I understand from Gunnar, the work that is happening with Anaplan and the configurations and so on, I think this is all classic, pure Agile work. Absolutely. Agile works very well for this sort of environment. Right, so much of talking about that. Just a quick question. Let me just pause. Am I doing okay so far? Is it clear? Any questions from anyone? On?
So just a quick question, right?
Yeah.
So when we're talking about the hybrid methods, right?
Yeah.
So what are the elements that goes hybrid? When you're talking about like crossing the two worlds, like the two
Okay,
lens, and then
that's a good one. For that, I need to give you a very specific example. Okay. Now, if you take construction, for example, so obviously when you're going to clear the land, you got to clear the land before you do the foundation work, right? Before you start putting on the bricks. So these sort of works, they cannot really be Agile because you have to be very sequential all the way. And construction is very sequential. But you also need to understand that the earlier, the pre-construction phase, where is their development of the charter, the design, and their engagement with their stakeholders, and conceptualization of their work, all of these aspects can be Agile. You see what I mean? Because you need to go back and forth, collaborating with your stakeholders to get that feedback, show progress, and move on. And sometimes this pre-construction phase itself can be 6 to 1 year, depending on the size of the project, right? So you see why they need to be in both worlds, because some parts are still very sequential, whereas some parts can be done in that way of Agile.
Okay. Yeah, understood. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Great.
So,
Good question. Very good question. I'm glad it came.
Okay. So, but I think you're doing okay so far. Yeah. So I got
All right.
the picture. Yeah.
Thank you. So let's get on with a bit of history. I mean, just for, you know, today's session is also educational, right? I wanted this session to also give you a bit of idea and how this all come about. Well, Agile is not that new. The term Agile was officially coined in 2001. That's more than 20 years now. But if you look at the books, it's already been written as early as the 90s, early 90s, 93, you've got people talking about all of this. So although it's not old, it's not that new either, right? It takes a lot of time to come to this part of the world, especially in Asia. And in the US and Europe, it's caught up like fire. Literally organizations I speak to, especially in software work, almost 100% companies have adopted Agile, almost 100%. I'll tell you that much. Some industries are a bit reluctant because of the nature of their business, but most of them have evolved. So basically, this group of gentlemen who met in 2001, they came up with this Agile Manifesto. And it basically says that, if you're trying to be Agile, then you need to understand what the values are and what the principles are. Now, I have not planned to go through the values in detail because that would take a bit of a time. We can do that in a follow-up training or whatsoever, but I thought it's just sufficient for you to understand that there are 4 values and 12 principles. So in other words, think about it this way, right? Agility is about mindset. It's the way you work. It's not about just installing a software and then, you're Agile now. It's not about that. If a consultant comes to you and say, don't worry about it, I will have a software installed in your company and you can be Agile. No way, absolutely no way. It's about the way of working, right? It's that mindset we're talking about. So that's something very important to remember, because even for me, when I do training, very often, it's not that, they can immediately become Agile, right? They need a bit of coaching, hand-holding. It takes a while. So that's on the historical part, but the good thing is that there are many different types of Agile flavors, right? If you talk about Samsung, that's Android, right? But you got other companies like Acer, O2, Oppo, all these are Android, right? So think of Agile like that, and you've got many different flavors of Agile. You've got Scrum, you've got Scrumban, and you've got other hybrid methods. Scrum is very popular. A lot of companies talk about Scrum, and today I'm going to talk to you a bit more about Scrum, just to give you an idea. So in total, what we're looking at is, we're talking about the 4 values on the left, the 12 principles coming up, that together is the manifesto. But remember, nobody remembers all these things, right? If I ask you to remember what the 12 principles are, you cannot remember. So not to worry. Fortunately, Agile has a set of practices. If you follow those practices, you are already Agile. That's good news. So you don't have to remember anything. You don't have to memorize anything. Just know and follow the practices in the right way, of course. Some people do it for the sake of doing, but it doesn't work out. So over time, what's going to happen is, you're looking at 3 phases. This is the way I see it. You start doing Agile, you start understanding the concepts, you are in phase 1. In phase 2, you start to integrate it. You start to be Agile. Now, if you're going to ask me how long does it take from phase 1 to phase 2, that will depend on a number of things. Number 1, it depends on the direction of the organization. And if the company itself understands there's a need to evolve and change the way we do projects, then it'll be very fast because the direction comes top down, right? And this has been my experience with Philip Morris, for information. When I started with them, in fact, only as early as last year, early last year. And this was the time during the pandemic, right? Early 2021. And, I got lucky to be connected with them. And when we did many rounds, I trained about 60 to 70 project managers. The entire company, they're all senior project managers being trained. And what has also happened is I had a session to brief the country manager and his D-level executives, the directors. So this was a company where it was so clear top down, they wanted to be agile. And in 1 year, I would say, they have moved from 1 to 2 in 1 year. But it takes a bit of while to become number 3, right? Phase 3, because, you know, it takes time to be part of your culture, right? So the agile way of working takes a bit of time, but, you know, you get my point, right? How the evolution goes up there. Any question up until this point? Oh, many questions for you or from you?
No question.
Okay, great. Am I okay with my pace? Am I too fast?
No, all good.
Okay, thank you. All right, so let me just get on to another part of what I want to talk about. What are the benefits of Agile? And I want you to tell me what is the top benefit that you see in this slide. The first one is morale. That's very important because Agile believes a lot in the people side of things, the team. And this is what I love about Agile. There's a lot of team empowerment. So that's number one. Number two, even if you're in the lockdown and you have distributed projects, Agile is great for this. It's really very good for this. That's why a lot of companies in the lockdown have no choice but to go towards Agile because Agile is really very catered for that. Productivity increase, of course. Now, I like this. And I think all of us in this room, especially project managers, you like this. Enhance delivery predictability. What does that mean? Now, you know, you always hear people saying we can release something in the 4th quarter. Don't worry, by 4th quarter we can release. But how sure are you that you can release something by the 4th quarter? Do you have the numbers? Do you have the data to prove that you can do it? Right? So this is a lot of stress for project managers, right? Or project leaders, because they really want to make sure they deliver in time, but they cannot be sure. Now, I'm telling you, if you understand and do Agile the right way, you can actually tell right now whether you're going to hit your delivery dates or not. You can. In some degree of certainty, you can. Of course, there are variables that might change, but minus all those things, you can. Now that's lovely, right? Because if I'm the project lead, I'm always wondering whether can I meet my deadlines? Can I achieve my targets? Trust me, if you do it well, you can. And I've done it time and time again with the projects that we have worked on. And this is also another benefit, right? Changing priorities. Remember VUCA we mentioned earlier? Things are always changing, right? So this is great for Agile. Reduce risk. Now, someone mentioned about reducing risk, right? B, you mentioned earlier when you shared, you said risk, right? So this is definitely one of the strong points of Agile. And this is the best part, right? Because, you know, always sometimes you find the IT work and the development work disconnected from the business drivers. In actual fact, they should be connected. The business needs and what's happening on the ground should be aligned. So that's great for Agile. So now what I want to do is, if you can take your mobile phone up again, we're going to do the same little exercise. I would like you to go to the link, menti.com, and see if you can put in the code. And all you're doing is to rank it. So number one, meaning what you think is the topmost benefit of implementing Agile. Now I'll show you the global survey later on in the next slide, but I just want you to have a feel of this. So you can rank all the other questions, 1, 2, 3, and 4, and until 7, which one is first and second and so on. Okay, we see some answers coming in. One more to go, I guess, or 2 more to go. Okay, let's take another 20 seconds. All right, so I'm just looking at what we have here. Well, that's a nice, interesting observation. Now, what I want to do is, most of us mentioned about delivery, managing distributed teams, and risk. Globally, when this survey was conducted across the globe, the findings were that companies found by using Agile, they were able to manage changing priorities very well. This was the topmost reason. And of course, the others, as you can see, productivity, alignment, predictability, all comes in that way. But it may be different, right? For different organizations. So maybe what you have stated in your view, it's the importance you see in using Agile for your organization, because you may have a set of pain points, or you may have a set of problems which may be different from other organizations too, right? So absolutely, this is what it is. So I'm just going to revisit this particular slide earlier on. Remember, I told you that you do not have to remember all the values and principles. Remember, I said that you only need to know what are the practices. Now I'm going to talk about that now. What are the practices in Agile? The popular ones. There's so many practices, by the way, but the top 5 most popular practice in Agile is what you see here. And this number you see, 85% here, says that 85% of organizations have found daily stand-up, for example, to be very effective. And likewise, all the others. Now, we will not be able to go into the details of this, so that will be in that training, which I conduct. But suffice to understand just for today, that these are the 5 practices that are very commonly used. So I'm going to talk about retrospective a little bit later. We'll talk about sprint planning a little bit later, review as well. So let me just talk about the first one, daily stand-up. What is that? Okay. Can I just check if it's been done, or it's sort of, I know Ghana has said that we're doing the stand-up for this particular project, right? So I think all of you know what the stand-up is.
We haven't started the project yet, Dr. Sanat.
Okay. All right. So it's not quite done at the moment yet. I see some heads nodding, so I gather that B, you have been doing this in the past.
Yeah, we have like a daily progress tracking.
Okay.
So that could be a daily stand-up as well.
Okay, that's very similar. But stand-up itself has got some very good benefits, right? The first thing you ask in the stand-up is, what have you done since the last session or the last stand-up? What have you done? Okay. the next question would be, what do you plan to do now until the next stand-up? Because remember, in some organizations, the stand-up could be 2 days after. In some organizations, it's the very next day, right? It depends on when the stand-up is. And thirdly, what are the problems or impediments or challenges you face, right? And we have to understand why these questions are asked. And it's all asked, all done within 15 to 20 minutes. It's really that quick, right? Someone jokingly said, why 15, 20 minutes? And they said, maybe you get tired, right? After standing for 15, 20 minutes. I mean, that's a joke. But I mean, yeah, you want it to be quick. You want it to be essential, not to take up everybody's time, right? That's the idea. And, some people ask me this question, why do we have to have the stand up every day? Is this a waste of time? In fact, I got asked this question by one HR manager. Now, he told me that, Sanat, in our company, I notice people are doing stand up and it's 15 minutes of time and it's 10 people's time. So it's 115 minutes of man hours, and you times that by X number of days, and there's a lot of time wasted. Now, I told him one thing, the way you're doing right now, I agree it's a waste because you got to do it correctly, right? Can you imagine if someone just comes and stand there, and just say, okay, and all that? Obviously, it's a waste of time. That's not the intention, right? The intention is to get a lot of value out of it. And the first question, a lot of people do not understand. The first question is, you actually start to appreciate people in the team better because, we don't know what people are doing. But if someone tells you, okay, I've done this, that's a good sign of appreciation, right? And people know what someone else is doing. And this person also gets the recognition of it. So remember, there is a lot of benefit to the stand-up if it's done well, of course. Any questions so far? So you notice this one lady here, right? She's holding a little pen and paper. It's quite likely that she's a Scrum Master, quite likely, not necessarily. And we'll talk about this role called a Scrum Master in a while. So let me get into the heart of our discussion today, right? So I said there are many methodologies out there, right? And the most popular one is Scrum, and a lot of organizations tend to use Scrum in one or more ways. The first thing is Scrum has this role called a product owner. Anyone heard of this role called a product owner? Is it something very new to you? B, in your previous project, have you had a product owner? Sorry, you're muted.
It's kind of like the core team of the client. Or what do you mean? Do you mean like?
do you have a role called a product owner? Is there such a thing in the project that you were with in the past?
No.
Okay, I'm sorry, I'm picking on you so much.
It's okay.
I think
So,
for our case, it's most likely would be solution architect would be the product
Okay.
owner. See, equivalent to product owner, yeah.
So what Kenny is trying to say is that this role, like I said, let's not get too fixated with the name. You can call it different names, solution architect, you call it a project lead or whatever name you want to use. But the role of the product owner is so important because the product owner understands the client's wants and needs, the business needs, the client's expectations so well, so that this can be communicated properly to the team that does the work. Right? Can you imagine if this is not there? there's lack of alignment now, because you got someone who is a representative or a proxy of your client in your project team. Now, how good is that? How good is that, right? Because, I mean, let's face it, we can't be, keep harassing our clients every day, asking all the little details, and that will take away the time of the development team so much. And you don't want the team to do what they're not supposed to do, right? So you get the product owner to do that. And what the product owner will do then, once he understands the requirements, he will detail it out in this backlog. Meaning, the backlog is a list of requirements. It's prioritized according to what should be done first, next, and so on. And then comes the development team. And of course, the development team can also insert work into the backlog, insert technical requirements into the backlog. All other requirements can be added into the backlog, including documentation work as well. And then we can start the sprint. The team will decide how much work they need to do in a sprint. Now, what is a sprint? I'm using a jargon here. Some of you must be wondering, what is this word sprint? Sprint is just a duration, okay? And if you say your duration is 2 weeks, so that much work has to be done in 2 weeks in order to produce an outcome, okay? And every day, the team will do a daily Scrum meeting, as you can see, right? You can see a daily Scrum meeting here. I'm just trying to put my pointer so you can see my pointer now, right? You can see my pointer. So every day the team will do a daily Scrum meeting in the presence of a Scrum Master. Now, the Scrum Master is someone who guides the team to do Agile properly, right? So usually we get people who are a bit more trained to do Agile work. Maybe they're certified. I had one project where apparently the client wanted the Scrum Master to be certified. So they've come to my training to get certified. So sometimes you really want someone who really understands Scrum really well. And that's a Scrum Master. And once you've completed your outcome, you have to do a demo, right? That's called a sprint review. So if you don't like the word sprint review, just use the word demo. That's it. It's just a demo session. And why do we need to do demo? Remember, I mentioned earlier, you want to get quick feedback to see that you're aligned. If you're not aligned, then you need to know why you're not aligned and what you need to do to be aligned, right? So that's pretty much what the review is all about. And at the end of it, you will do a retrospective. Now, what is a retrospective? The simplest word to describe that is postmortem, right? We all know what postmortem is, right? It's a bit like a reflection, trying to understand what went wrong and what can we do better and so on. Now, the interesting thing is this retrospective actually gets fed into the next sprint. So what you learn in one sprint, the lessons learned, will be used as an input to do things better the next sprint. And likewise, it keeps going on and on and on and on until the backlog is completed. So this sprint, as you see in this slide, it's iterative, right? Because you keep doing small parts, do the sprint, complete the outcome, do the review, demo, and do the retrospective, the postmortem, get your lessons learned, input into your next sprint, and then start some new work again, another 2 weeks, finish the outcome, do the demo review, and it keeps going like that until the project is completed. Now, what do I mean by project completed? Your backlog is zeroized. There's nothing in the backlog. It means you've done it all, right? All right, question for now. Can I just hear any thoughts, questions? I've spoken quite a bit.
Um, so who actually do the sprint planning? Is it the product owner? And what is the criteria for cutting the sprint?
Absolutely a very good question. Typically in a sprint planning meeting, what happens is on the development team, the guys who are doing the work, along with the product owner, will sit together and decide how much work we need to do in that sprint that's coming up. So why we need the product owner as well? Because sometimes the team, sometimes, they undercommit. They undercommit, they do less than what they're supposed to be doing. So we want the product owner to provide a bit of check and balance. Because what happens if you do not have the product owner is that they may not be aligned to the roadmap, because you have a roadmap, right? You know when to deliver what. But by all means, the development team has a bigger say, because they know what needs to be done, right? They know when it should be done, because they have the technical knowledge. So we have to respect the input and the decision from the development team as to when things should be done and what should be done, and also how it should be done.
Oh, just asking though might sounds like a weird question, right? But so in a typical project management, you would have project manager. So where is a project manager in this picture? Is he typically, because can he say he's a product owner, like for this it will be equivalent to SA, right? But in terms of like the overall project management, so is he or she like basically on top of this, or typically is
Okay,
he like where's this person? Yeah.
I will answer your question in two ways, right? Now, in the purest of agile implementation, when I say pure, if you're really following the book as it is, which not all organizations will follow anyway, because agile is agile, right? You can always adjust. So maybe the implementation that is being done, like what Tiani and Ghana might be proposing to you, may be a bit different from what this is, but that's absolutely fine. So what I'm trying to say is, typically you will not hear the role of a project manager so much in Agile, because we are decentralizing the ownership to the team. But having said that, you will find that this role called a project lead still exists, right? Because you want a point of responsibility, right? Because if, typically management, they assign this one person to take control of the timelines and everything else. So in that sense, you might still have a project lead. But remember, the idea is to get the team to be empowered over time. Because if the project manager has to do everything, monitor, check, and make sure work is going on, that means there is a lack of empowerment in the team. But that doesn't happen overnight, let me tell you that much, because it takes time to move from a very command-driven into a very team-driven, right? It takes time. But I hope that sort of answers your question. So yeah, you still, like I said, if you don't use the word project manager, then you might even use the word a project lead. That's fine. It's just a term, right? But you get the idea. All right, let's just see how this works a bit more. I'm just going to run a simulation for you. Let's assume on the far left, you have your backlog, right? And your backlog is prioritized. And what's on the top is done first, and the next, and the next, and the next, right? Are we good so far?
I think you got one question from my colleague.
Oh, I did. Okay, yes, I just saw something popping up. Okay. This is from Om, I believe, right? If we get feedback in sprint 1 and need to fix it, we need to plan time to redo sprint 1 and sprint 2. Okay, so that's a very good question, Om. Thank you for asking. So what happens is, let's say, you finish one sprint, right? And then you do the feedback, and that feedback is coming here, right? Sprint review. And say customer says, so usually feedback, two things happen. Okay, number one, you were supposed to do something, but you did not do it correctly. That means there's some changes that needs to be made, right? Or number two, you or the customer completely gives you something new to add on, which is not what was told earlier. So in both cases, this additional changes or new work will be done in the next sprint. So that's right, what you asked, Om. So I wouldn't say a redo, but sometimes, changes in some part of your work or some additions. So that's right, in a way, what you've asked. Are you clear, Om?
Okay. It means the original requirement in the sprint one is not a new thing, but we need to, in case we develop the wrong thing and we need to fix it. We need to, but the time is up in the sprint one. We need to go to the next sprint. It means it will interrupt the time in sprint two, right?
Okay, I'm not sure whether I completely got your question because of the audio, but I think I got it. If I just let me explain what I think I heard from you. So when you want to fix it or redo, remember you cannot do it anymore in sprint one, right? Because it's over. You can only do that changes or updates in sprint two.
Okay, got it. Not break down it into another sprint 2.1, 2.2, right? But we can combine it into one sprint in sprint two, right? Yes. So
I don't think I got the last part because there's a bit of echo at your end.
I think that the question was more like basically what happened is that okay, so if the first sprint, right, the outcome wasn't what you expected, so basically the person that you say that it will then be the I don't know how to say this new I don't know whether you can call it issue log or something, right? It would then be plugged into sprint two. That's what we understand.
Absolutely.
But does it mean that the sprint two, the duration will it be longer, or do we need to actually regrouping the sprint again? And that will be, it might lead to additional sprint, and this will lead to like the how to say the delay in the overall project.
Of course. You see, this is possible because this is why before we even start the sprint, we need to be quite clear of what we're intending to do. You see, in Agile, we don't have to plan for the entire project, but before you start a sprint, you must be absolutely clear about what you're going to start in the next sprint. So if you're clear and the customer is also informed what you're doing, then if you do it, the chances are that you will meet the customer's requirements. Of course, you cannot be 100%. Say you met 80%, right, during the review. So what happens to the 20%? The 20%, of course, will be carried to the next sprint. You see, we do not, in principle, extend the sprint. Okay, this is something that Agile do not recommend, because if we keep changing the sprint length, okay, it's 2 weeks, or the next sprint is 3 weeks, and then after that 4 weeks, then there's no discipline. So the discipline is we keep what we need to do and we try and complete it as much as we can within the sprint. But if it still cannot complete, or the customer give you feedback, then the new feedback will be done in the next sprint. So you're right. If we keep doing or getting new requirements, there will be chances that additional sprints may be required to complete the project. But it is better than waiting for 6 months or 1 month before you get a feedback, because by that time, already 1 month is lost. So that is why the suggestion is keep your sprint to 2 weeks at minimum. I know project teams who have also 1 week sprint, possible. But sometimes 1 week can be a bit stressful for the team. Okay, so 2 weeks is a good duration. But I've seen projects with even 4 weeks, especially R&D projects. Sorry, I'm just checking again if that made sense. You can key in on the chat also if it's okay for you so far. I'm going to show a simulation now, so maybe that makes it a bit clearer. If I can just proceed with the simulation. Okay, so this is my backlog. Okay, so I'm going to start my project. Let's say I've done my requirement study. I've got all the work I need to do and so on. I start my sprint and I do the work as a team, and I do the demo after 2 weeks. Now, the demo is also called sprint review, right? Yeah, we heard that earlier. And then I move to sprint 2. Yeah, is there a question? So let's assume here, okay, let's make it a bit unrealistic. Okay, let's assume in sprint 1, the customer did not add any more requirements, which is not true in most cases, but let's make it simple that customer accepts everything in sprint 1. And then you go to sprint 2. Now, can you see your backlog on the left? It gets lesser and lesser, right? Right. And you do your work in sprint 2. After 2 weeks, you do the demo, and then finally, no other additional work. You do what is left on the sprint. You manage to complete what's left, and in 2 weeks, you do the demo again. Now look at the far left, your backlog is 0, nothing there, which means the project is finished. But things are not like this, right, in real life sometimes, because as Om asked this question earlier, there will be additional requirements or changes needed. So it will go into the backlog, and therefore it might cause you to do 4 sprints, maybe, not just 3. This is possible. Now, is this good or bad? That's just fact of life, right? You still have to accommodate your customer's request. And if the sprints need to be added on for whatever reason, it will have to be added on. But again, if we have engaged the customers so well, the chances are that by the end of the project, you may or will get what the customer is expecting. This is the important thing. Questions so far?
Just asking though, what happened, right? So you basically say that, okay, for each sprint, you're trying to keep the duration to be 1 to 4 weeks, right? What happened if it's like basically your team effort to build that, and you kind of like trying to fit everything in 1 to 4 weeks? I have no issue with that. But sometimes, right, you actually require, for example, in this project that I'm actually anticipating, you would need some sort of like data input from maybe another party, for example, like my customer, right? And because they are not operating on agile method, right? They are actually, their mindset is like to prepare data. They need to do cleansing, like data load, data extraction, whatever. And typically the duration would require longer than 1 to 4 weeks from their understanding, right? How would you like actually fit that into each sprint?
So what I would say, it's a good question, really. So the decision to decide whether it's 1, 2, 3, or 4 depends on a lot of factors, okay, which I didn't cover because of time constraint. But to quickly answer your question is the nature of the project and the ability for you to get the feedback in time by the client. So in this kind of environment, you're saying that it is not possible for whatever reason to get some feedback in 2 weeks, then my advice to you is come into a negotiation with your client that you will want them to give input on what you have done maybe every 3 weeks. So whatever it is not that I'm saying you must be 2 weeks, but what I'm saying is if it's 3 weeks, keep it consistent throughout the project. If you keep changing the weeks, then what will happen is later on, I'm going to share with you a lot of the reporting elements, because in Agile, there's a lot of metrics. You can generate a lot of metrics to see your completion rate and your velocity and so much and this and that. These things will go haywire because your parameters are changing, right? But in principle, to answer your question, there's no hard and fast rule to say it must be 2. It depends on the kind of project and the engagement with the client.
Okay, yeah, because it's not actually the input that I'm actually concerned about, but it's more about the data migration part, that if you run an implementation project, you need data to test, right?
Yeah.
And
So what you can do is, in that kind of environment, what I would suggest is, if you find that it's a large chunk of work that takes a bit too long, so you can actually have interim milestones. You know, maybe you can space it out. Even in the migration, you can have a chunk and say, okay, we have done this part, and let's see how that comes out. Because you see, can you imagine if you continue doing something across 2, 3, 4 weeks, and only then you have an opportunity to see whether it's working or getting some feedback. And what if it does not work out? You lost 4 weeks. So by having earlier sprints, you're giving yourself an opportunity to get that input and confirmation from the client whether you're doing okay or not. So that's the spirit of having a short sprint. But like I said, this is not hard and fast rule. And some projects you need longer. That's absolutely fine. If you can justify the reason for it, that's fine.
okay, yeah.
All right, so let's just move on into another space. We call it Agile Planning. I'm conscious of time. We are at about 12:10 almost. We do have until 1. So sorry, Malaysian time is 12:10. I know it's 11:10 your time, right? So we do have until 12 o'clock Bangkok time. So we still have time. So let's look at Agile Planning now. Well, in Agile Planning, it's done continuously. It's done throughout. And why do I say throughout? Because remember when I showed you the chart, right? Remember this sprint planning meeting? It happens every sprint, right? So every sprint you're doing planning as to what to be done, you know, what should we do differently, how should we overcome this problem. This planning is happening at every sprint. In fact, it's even happening much more frequent than that. If you look at we call it the Agile Onion, you know, it's like an onion, right? So we've got your sprint here, if you can see a sprint every 2 weeks, but you also have the opportunity to plan almost on a daily basis when you do your calls, right? Your call for your daily Scrum or daily stand-up meeting. So daily Scrum or daily stand-up meeting is the same thing, by the way, just a different term. Hope you're not confused. So even on a daily basis, planning happens. On a bi-monthly basis, every 2 weeks, planning happens. On a release, now you may have a release, right? And what's a release? Something that happens after a couple of sprints, a larger piece of work completed, that's just release. And of course, you have a roadmap. And roadmap is what you need to communicate with your customer, right? Because the customer wants to see what can possibly be released by which time zones, like, you know, first quarter, mid-month, or second quarter, by which month. It's not like a Gantt chart, but it's just a high level stuff kind of thing. And of course, your planning happens at a very, very high level, which is vision. Most of us here in this call, we do not have that sort of ability to decide the vision. Usually it's done by the higher level management, right? So when it comes to us, it's usually the roadmap. So project leads, they need to do the roadmap. So in the actual full training, I will go into the details of how to chart the roadmap, how to come up with high level epics, and then how to translate that into releases and how to structure your sprints so that you meet your release targets. All of that will be done. I'm just giving you a very high level overview today. So in other words, what's happening is in the backlog, it's just 3 major steps, right? You of course create the requirements, number 1. You prioritize them. And there are certain techniques we learn on how to prioritize. It's not as simple as it seems. I'll tell you why. Because you see, it's not like just putting a number, right? Oh, this is number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5, number 6. It's not so simple, right? Why? Because sometimes you have competing stakeholders. When I say competing stakeholders, stakeholder A might say, this is important for me. Stakeholder B might say, no, this is not important. Something else is important. How do you rationalize different inputs? So that's why you need to understand techniques to help you prioritize. And of course, estimation of effort, okay? And that's very important for planning, right? So all of this will be, discussed in very detail, which is very, very important. Agile is very strong on these things. But just for our benefit today, I'll just run through you. When we prioritize, we look at urgency, importance. Something is important but not urgent. Sometimes it's urgent but not important. So that may decide the priority, right? And logical dependency. Sometimes you have certain logic that this must be done first and then the next one. So that is so obvious. Sometimes you have certain technical requirements that needs to be done earlier before some other functions can be developed, right? And your stakeholder wants something earlier, then you have no choice. And risk. If you need to mitigate some risk to make sure that your project succeeds, that needs to be done first, right? And of course, there are many techniques, like I said, on how to prioritize. I wouldn't want to go into this a lot. But I believe you understand this importance of prioritization. Can I just check on the chat? If you can just say okay on the chat, if you understand the need for prioritization, because remember your backlog is prioritized, right? And whatever you do in your sprints, they're all based on the prioritization and what the customer is expecting at which interval. Okay, everyone, just checking on the chat. All right, thank you for your feedback. Okay, so let's move on then. Thank you for that input. I know this is a bit high level, so when you said, okay, I think you understood it from a high level, but surely the training would get you into more details. Now, this is something I like, and I think project managers, any project leads will love this. There are loads of ways to monitor progress. How do you monitor the health of your project? And there are many ways to do this. And one of the things we do is to look at burn up, burn down charts. We can actually track project completion across time and to see whether we are meeting our targets. Sometimes we accept additional requirements. Like in this case, if you notice at number 5, at sprint 5. By the way, the word iteration is the same as sprint. If you're wondering why the word iteration is there, it's the same thing. At sprint 5, you notice that the team accepted new requirements, right? The blue line is the requirements kept increasing. Okay, so unfortunately, the team was able to complete all, but because it is increased from 100 to 120 requirements, the project has not completed. Well, is that good or bad? That's actually fine, because remember, because you prioritized, what is already done are already the top features anyway. So what's left undone is most likely the low impact or low critical features, not critical. So if you're wondering here, some of you might be wondering, what is this y-axis? 0, 20, 60. Okay, this is in Agile, we call it as story points. Now, story points is the way we estimate effort. And that's a big discussion in itself, which I unfortunately may not be able to get into. But suffice to understand that when you track your effort in terms of how much work needs to be done, in Agile, we use story points. I'm going to put it on the chat so that you understand how it's spelled. Story points. So we will be doing this in detail should we get into the training proper to understand how to come up with these things. It's so important to understand story points because I know a lot of teams who claim to be doing Agile, but they do not use story points as well as they should be doing. And because of that, the ability to track, monitor, and manage the project is very, very limited. So that's one thing to take note of. And you can also have a burn down chart. It shows how much work remaining. The earlier chart shows how much completed. This chart shows how much remaining. Okay, so again, there are loads of tools that can generate these things. And just in case you didn't know, there's one tool called Jira. How many of you have used Jira before? If you can just say yes or no on the chat. Jira as a tool, Agile project management tool. Jira. All right. So what about Home? Have you used Jira or B? Okay, it's already a no there. All right. By the way, Jira is just one of the many tools that are used by organizations. There's so many. You can even use Microsoft tools and a lot of open source tools as well. But since I happen to be the Atlassian community leader for the country, so we do a lot of talks and events for how to use these tools really well. So that's a discussion for another day. But let's get on and understand this planning a bit. So we know that, you know, planning happens at all levels. And what's very important is that we basically look at planning as releases, right? Some releases are date driven. You know, some clients are very, very strict about dates. You know, by this date, I want this done. But some clients are more focused on the functions. So they say, okay, we will only release if these functions are there. Otherwise, there's no point releasing it. Okay, so you could either be date or function or even more both. So the difference in release and sprint, I'm almost at the tail end of my slides, by the way. Just have a few more slides to go before we end. I'm sorry, some of these terms may come up a bit new to you, but think of a release as a larger output, right? Think of a sprint as a small output. That will be easier for you to understand. And why do we need a larger output and why do we need a small output? Because your small outputs will lead to a larger outputs. If you do not show the user your small output, which is your sprint, and you don't get confirmation, how sure are you the user will accept your last final output? So to increase your success rate of acceptance, you need to have your smaller output, which is your sprint. Does that make sense? Just checking if I'm making sense here.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much for that feedback. So I'm just going to move on. This is a huge space, agile risk mitigation. And you and I know if we don't mitigate risk, a risk can become a problem, right? So we do not want that to happen. So I like this saying in Agile, right? If you have to fail faster, right? Because the earlier you fail, then you know you would have expended less resource, less money, less effort. But the later you fail, a lot of time, money, effort would have been wasted, right? So that's the whole spirit of risk mitigation, to fail fast. If you have to fail, of course, you don't have to fail. Why even fail? And of course, there's a huge area which I obviously cannot cover, but we will do that in that proper session. Team empowerment, I love this. This is a very important area because Agile believes in a lot of team empowerment. After all, it's the team who's doing the work. They need to be empowered. And if they're empowered well, trust me, as leaders, as managers, your job is very easy. But you need to give them the right environment, the right support, and there's one word that must be there: trust, for empowerment to take place. And this is a nice one for you. Agile leaders lead teams. So what are we looking at really, right? We're looking at, if you want to achieve empowered teams, you need to know how to make your team self-organized. And only if they're self-organized, they become self-directed, and eventually they be empowered. Now, this is the best thing to happen in any team, an empowered team. Trust me, they will do the work to the level that exceeds your expectation. I repeat, they will do the work to the level that exceeds your expectation. That's an empowered team. But it takes time, but it can be done. And in my coaching sessions, we talk a lot about this. And when I go to companies, we sit down and observe and give them feedback. I instill a lot of these things. Because I told you, Agile is not about tools. It's not about Jira. I just said about Jira because that's an example. But it's not about tools. It's about mindset, right? It's about people, collaboration. And this is the last part of my session, really. And, you know, in Agile, quality improvement happens all the time. Do you remember I talked about the retrospective? You remember there is a last part of your Scrum called retrospective?
Yeah.
You
Remember.
Yep. So this is the part I'm talking about, right? Where the quality improvement happens, this part. So I'm going to talk about this part a bit more. And that's a very important area, because if you keep making the same mistakes, that means you have not learned, right? Making a mistake once is fine. But if you repeatedly make mistakes, it means something is not right about the learning cycle. The learning cycle is what I'm talking about. And when you talk about quality and process, you know, we're talking about the 4P, right? We're talking about the project aspects, improvement of the project aspects, the way you estimate and so on, the people aspects. You know, some people is the attitude problem, you know, they're not a team player, they keep making the same mistakes. And the process, the way you do it, and all of this will contribute to your product. Your product is your outcome. So retrospective talks about the 4 Ps, and we will go into this aspect a bit more in the training, right? The quality aspects. And ultimately, I think, okay, that we want eventually is to use the retrospective and introspective. What is the difference? What is the difference between introspective and retrospective? Well, easiest answer is retrospective, done within the team, introspective, done within the individual. You ask yourself questions. That's introspective. Retrospective, between the team members. Okay, both needs to be done, because sometimes the problem is me. I need to fix certain problems I have, right? And sometimes it's the team, because we made a decision that was wrong. So both levels, the reflection needs to take place. And ultimately, this will lead to improved productivity. Productivity does not just happen if we don't improve our capability, our capacity, and our quality. All right, so of course, this is a huge topic, and I'm coming to my last slide. We will go into the details, of course, in the session, but all I wanted to do today is to give you an idea of what are the aspects that we're talking about Agile. I hope this session has given you a little bit of an eye-opener as to what are we talking about. So I would like to end my presentation here, and I'm happy to take on questions. And first and foremost, maybe I'll ask you the easiest question. Has this given you a little of a high level perspective of what Agile is, and what are we looking at in terms of Agile project management?
Yeah, like yes, kind of like an overview. Yes, yes. So kind of like understand the difference. Because yeah, we've been through the waterfall method, I think, and as B said, she's been through both methods. So yes, I do appreciate, and I know that basically for this NFM project, it has to be operating on the agile method, right? Yes. So I think the challenge will be like I said, be operating on agile method. However, there will be dependency with the how to say the external party activities, for example, like the data preparation as well. So and data need to be incorporated into each sprint in order to conduct the test. So I think strategizing that with Ghana will be priority, and also from what I see, something like a product backlog. And actually, I have some questions in terms of like the product backlog and the when you show me the illustration of the sprint.
Just
that,
sorry,
is-
just before that, I will answer your first question that you just asked earlier. That's a good point. You see, what actually happens is that you may have external parties doing work for you, and all that dependencies or work items from different parties will be part of your backlog as well. And you will just take certain work items to put it in a running sprint. So when you move that work items in a running sprint, you are able to now track your work very well. It's all visible. If you're using a tool, you can see what is being done, what is currently to be done, and what is already done. Okay, so now that's to give you a quick answer to that part. Yeah, go ahead.
So it's okay. Maybe to add on to that. So I'm start to seeing like the migration as its own sprint, into several sprint that feed the output from the data migration sprint into the actual development sprint.
Absolutely.
Although that will be quite challenging.
Yeah. So what you could do is this: you could have like, you know, because it's a large piece of work, the migration itself. So you can have different stages, and the stages would be like little pilots, if you like, leading to the actual migration. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So maybe for the unit test data, need to kind of like frame that with the client, like quickly, and because it's quite actually depending on the template as well, right? So it's basically if you have one development sprint, there will be per the requirement from the development sprint, you will produce like the data template, right, for data migration, and that has to be provided to the client to prepare the test data, and then it feed back to the development sprint for testing. However, the lead time for the client to prepare data, I don't see it as an easy task for me. Because firstly, we are actually dealing with a project that client doesn't have like existing tool that much, so data is quite scattered. So that's why I'm a little bit concerned about the duration for each sprint. I'm not concerned about the building. I'm concerned about the testing. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think for all intents and purposes, if you ask me, this is my quick take of what you're saying. I unfortunately do not have much insights on the current sort of project that you're talking about. But from the little I've had talking to other similar related work, what I can tell you is this: for all intents and purposes, the work itself is not going to change, right? So what we're trying to do is we're trying to introduce some best practices to manage the outcomes better. By in doing so, sometimes I agree, we may have to get our stakeholders who are going to be part of our agile process to be also aware of these things. And that is also why I have recorded this session in a way, because I wanted this to be shared across others who may be able to benefit from this session also. But that's one. Number two, I think it's, I suppose in your question, in your mind, it's not so much whether we're using Agile or not, but ultimately the work is to be done, right? That migration has to take place, regardless of the approach we take, right?
Yes. Because I think it's critical for this project, and it's something that is pretty hard to control. And the other thing that I have questions, Dr. Sanat, is when you say the product backlog, right? I would assume it's something like user stories. Is that correct? Ish.
Well, yes, you are correct. However, the backlog does not just contain user stories. It also contains other things like certain documentation work, reporting work, testing work, even migration work,
Okay.
risk mitigation work. So in other words, to put it simply, anything that needs to be done as part of the project needs to be in the backlog. If it's not in the backlog, it will not be done. Stop. As simple as that.
And then okay, and then in each spiral shape that you show for each sprint, that kind of like interconnected, for example, like sprint 1, sprint 2, and sprint 3, one of the first chevron is basically requirement.
Yeah, so that's the thing. It says, for example, if you have your, you see, in most projects, we obviously have some requirements to start from, right? And what I would say in Agile is that, yes, we have our requirements, but it's not possible to have 100% because there will always be certain additions that would trickle in. That's fine. So I would say in most Agile projects, if you have up to about 75 to 80% of your requirements, you can already start because you know most of it. And whatever you may have left out will most likely not be a very, I would say, critical requirement anyway. It will be some cosmetic requirements that will be added on in the later sprints. That's usually the case. So to answer your question, that is what we're looking at, right?
And the requirement is typically obtained from by the development team to the SA, correct? The product owner.
all of that remains unchanged. And if your requirement phase, can I check with you how long is that? Is that a month or two, or is it just short period?
You mean the overall project that I'm currently
Yeah, the requirement itself, that studying of the requirements and getting it into the backlog. How long will that particularly take?
So actually how to say, so there are two projects. So I'm in one project where I help basically trying to obtain understanding. So I was in this project for like 4 or 5 months already. Yeah, because currently there's kind of like no standardized practice across
Okay.
this organization. And
Absolutely.
the whole
So
planning,
I'm
yeah.
gathering from you that the conceptualization phase or the requirement studying and all of that, it's a fairly long period of work to be done,
already,
right?
yeah. And now it has to be translated into the how to say it, the system perspective.
All right.
Right.
All right. So that work
So-
will have to be taken, and someone like the product owner or that kind of role will be crucial, maybe yourself, to understand, what the system needs and what the business needs. And you see, the product owner's role is very important because he or she understands the technical challenges as well as the business needs from the customer. So the product owner interfaces both worlds. So yes, so your requirements, because it's that long, frankly, if you ask me, that's a moving, evolving target, right? You will never get a big bang. So you need to structure your output, your requirement stages in phases to lead you to that goal. Yeah, it's all a bit hazy. I can see from you on, but that's really fine because I'll be very surprised if you are really like understood all in this 1 hour plus, because that's not possible. But I think what you have been able to digest so far, it's already very great, because in a short time you're able to see the picture, and you've been paying a lot of attention, I noticed.
I think okay, sure.
Let's ask the rest of the team. And any question? And B, you have been involved in this sort of thing before, right? And so this is not really that, the other jargons, that are things I've shared, is it really very new, or you sort of heard these things before?
Yeah. Okay.
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah. So I was wondering, in the picture that involved a lot of people, in the Agile methodology Scrum, so product owner can be like, I'm just wondering, like, should product owner needs to communicate directly to the client, or that there can be like the middle person?
Product owner is
Ganesh,
supposed to be doing that. Sorry, is that a question from
Ganesh,
Ghana?
let me just give some background to why B is asking that. Because of the
Sure.
language problem, they want to be the person coordinating it with the client. So I'm okay with that. So we will communicate with Deloitte, and then Deloitte will communicate that with SCSZ, the client.
Yeah,
So for
but to
all
answer
intent-
so just to answer your quick question, sorry, Ghana, just a quick one. Yes, the product owner is supposed to do that role, to interface with the client. Yep, over to you, Ghana.
No, it's okay. Yeah, so in all intent and purpose, cloud analytics client would be Deloitte at this point of time. They will be discussing the requirement with the end user, which is SC Asset.
Okay. Okay, understand.
Unless B, if the client is English speaking and is the person who is coordinating everything on SC Asset person, we all can be on the call together and the product owner can explain so that there is no, sometimes when you communicate, things are dropped in the crack. So you may not want that. So it is good that the product owner communicates. But I will leave that during the project and we see how the progress is with the client and with Deloitte, and then we take it from there.
I completely agree with what Gana just said, because sometimes you see, they say always 2 pairs of eyes or 3 sets of eye sets is better than 1, right? So, if you miss out something, somebody else can support you better in understanding the requirements. So yes, I agree.
Okay. Okay. Yeah.
How about Om? I've been a bit quiet so far. Any question?
No question.
All good. Okay. If there are no further questions, if at all there are any questions, I'm always contactable. Please be in touch with Gana, and we're very happy to support you in any way, whether it is a follow-up training that is to be done for your team. Because let me put this one way, Agile is to stay. Whether we adopt it or not, this is going to stay. So it's a question of when do we adopt it and how soon can we adopt it and realize the benefits of it. So on that note, I will end my session here, and it's over to you, Gana.
Hi, Sanat. Firstly, thanks for your valuable time and your content for the Agile project management. Isari, do you have any questions?
No. I actually I do get the spirit of it, like in terms of like the agile implementation. Yeah, like being reading like secondary material like on the web, whatever. But it's nice to have someone to kind of like help to wrap it up in one piece through this nice presentation. So thank you. Appreciating that very much. Yes.
Okay.
Okay. I thought it'd be
Okay.
nice if we can take a photo if as a memory of this nice session.
Mm.
So if we can have your cameras on, and then we can take a quick photo.
I'm just wearing a t-shirt working from home.
That's fine, no problem. No problem at
I'm
all.
in the restaurant, so I will be with my mask on. Hope you don't
That's
mind.
No,
fine.
it's okay. Just with your
Yeah,
mask
hang on,
is
just give me
okay.
a second.
Okay, cool. All right, I will send this later on to Gana for us to share, right? So
You
the
can
count
send straight.
here itself.
Can you
Yeah, I
see
can
the
do it.
camera? You got to
I can
turn
do
it the other way around.
Okay, hang on. This way or this way? This way?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, now
Okay.
good. All right, I'm just gonna take in the count of 1. Hold on. 1, 2, and 3. All right, I think I got it, and I'm going to share with everyone. Just a sec. Okay. coming in. All right, there you go.
Oh, nice.
So on that note, it's been lovely chatting with you, speaking with you, and it feels like I'm coming back to Bangkok after so long. And thank you, Ghana, for inviting me, Tiani as well. We hope to be in touch. Hope to be in touch with future sessions. And
Thank
if there's
you.
nothing else, I think we can end the call. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Have a nice day.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.